right, so here we are at the Sticks Out podcast number 11, and I'm here with Chad Bennett. Hello.
Hey, Noel.
So I just really want to appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule, Dark Monkey, and making time to talk. So,
Sure.
First off, who are you, Chad? So, where are you from originally, and what type of education have you participated in? You know, things like favorite animal.
Well, let me return the favor first. Thanks for having me, Noel. I think this is a huge honor to be hosted on a podcast that you're doing. I really do appreciate it. Who is Chad? That's a big question. I grew up in the coast of North Carolina, a little tiny town. We actually went by the county. We didn't even go by the towns. We got our first stoplight in my county my freshman year of college. So it was really, really, really small. Everybody knew each other. Had fields all the way around the house. It was a little tiny area. Was always interested in computers. Decided I wanted to go to college to learn everything there was about computers. So went and got an electrical engineering degree and a computer engineering degree. And didn't want to do that much anymore, although I still do enjoy programming on occasion. Went from there and started a bunch of small businesses throughout my life. I think I've started 7, 8, or 9 small businesses. Most of them failed miserably, and learned a ton from them all. Amazing adventures. I went back in early 2000s. My goal was always to go back and get an MBA. And 2004 through 2006, went to Boston College and got my MBA. From there, it was an amazing experience. Really, really diverse group, a small class size, very, very wonderful people to get to work with from such different backgrounds. I learned a ton from that and got to go in with a lot of experience, coming in with a lot of entrepreneurial experience, a lot of small business experience, already been a manager for quite a few years. Was amazing. Moved all over the country. I'm missing one continental U.S. state that I've not visited, which is South Dakota, and I do actually really want to go see the Badlands. I think it would be really cool.
So all right, so transitioning here. So you are one of the creators of Wildfire, is that true?
Yes. I organized the first meetup locations, the first events. I definitely had some help getting the word out and stuff like that. But yeah.
Okay, so how did you go from computer guy, and even if I maybe I know this story, but how did you go from computer guy to starting an event like Wildfire? I'm assuming there's a gap between those two things.
There is. It's the most the cliche story you could possibly imagine. In 2003, I went through a big breakup with somebody I was really involved with. Moved out to LA for a contract that I'd gotten in computer management. We were putting antenna systems on airplanes, and a company bought our whole product line and hired me to come out. And I was just there to kind of recover. 3 weeks being there, a good friend of mine calls me up and says, "Hey, I'm in Reno. I'm going to Burning Man. If you never hear from me again, that's where I'm at. I'm in the desert." I had no idea what she was talking about. So I get online, find out what the world Burning Man. I think it's super cool. Buy a ticket. I mean, this was the week of Burning Man. Drive out there with 2 people I met online right then. None of us knew each other. Rented a car from LA. Drove out there at sunrise and walking across the desert going, where the hell am I? This is amazing. It's weird. It's really crazy. And all of a sudden there was this poof of fire off to my right. I turn, walk over, sit down as the sun's coming up, and these people are breathing fire to the man. And then these 2 people stand up and start spitting fire around their body. And I'm like, that's dance, that's martial arts, and it's fire. And these are 3 things that are a huge part of my life, or want to be part of my life. Whatever that is, I want to do it. So I spent the rest of Burning Man trying to figure out what in the world that was, came back to LA, made these really ratty tennis ball poi that I still have to this day that are embarrassingly bad. Spun. Was honestly about to give it up. Kind of got the 3-beat weave and was like, oh, this is fine, but I was all by myself. And I got this email from one of the lists I'd gotten on that said the very first meetup of fire spinners and drummers. They're going to do it down at this place called Pismo Beach, and everybody should come that's interested. And it was called Fire Drums. And
Number one, that would be the first intercaption, the first fire drums at Pismo Beach, not run by the following people, but just as a fact, that is fire drums number one. And just for historians out there, go on.
Yeah, the very first one. I ordered a poi from Humble Poi, Fire Poi. It came in the day I was leaving. I show up, didn't know anybody at all. We all just hang out on the beach where they were literally like, there was a tire fire next door. People were running dune buggies around. Probably 60 people or so were there. I lit up for the first time. That was my very first time ever lighting Fire Poi. And it was amazing. And it wasn't just, and what got me, what really hooked me, it wasn't the art. The art kind of brought us together. It was the culture. It was the welcoming. They didn't know who I was. Most of them never met before. And they were like, come in. You're interested in this? Come here. You're one of us. Just hang out. Who are you? Let me show you whatever I know. And it was like family. It was like all of a sudden people that are different and smart and talented in multiple ways that you could tell maybe didn't quite fit in everywhere. We're all there, and they were all, it blew my mind. I'd never hung out with people like this before. I was much more of the nerd, kind of the engineer that could talk to people, so I was weird in the engineer community. But I had never really hung out with the arts community. I'd done dance and martial arts, but not like this, not like circus arts and the stuff. And oh man, it was so amazing. So that happened. I came back to Boston. My contract was over, and they were throwing an outdoor event, and they wanted to invite. That was related roughly to Burning Man, called Mayfire, early 2004, and they invited anybody that knew anything about poi. And I got involved and said, all right, let me invite people. I found Scott Billups down in Connecticut, who was already running a spin jam down there. There was no spin jam in Boston. There was only a few spinners in New England. And I caught him. I called anybody else I could find online and said, let's come do this. And even some people from New York came up. And they all came. And unfortunately, whoever was in charge of the fire permits didn't get them. But we all spun and hung out. We thought it was the coolest thing. And then the next year, I was like, well, let's do this again, but let's do this in our own kind of place. And I started looking everywhere for campgrounds, whatever we could find. And I found this Boy Scout campground that had kind of an abandoned old area that they rented to me. It was all under my name and my money and all that kind of stuff. And I just put out the call and said, all right, anybody that's interested in coming, come on. And we adopted the old the Burning Man kind of approach of, welcome home. Everybody got greeted with welcome home and a hug if they were interested in hugging. And we just set up and taught each other everything we knew. And it was just it was like a spin jam, really. That's the way Wildfire started.
So wait, what year was that?
2005 was that one where we were at at an actual thing. And we called the first one Mayfire because it was in May. And when we finished, multiple people was like, can we do this again? Can we do this again? I'm like, sure, let's figure that out. And I called the campground. They said they could rent it to us in September. And it's like, okay, well, now I have to come up with a different name. And I swear I spent 2 to 3 months.
So wait, the first Wildfire was not called Wildfire? Is that what you're saying?
The very first one was Mayfire.
Okay, so question then. From that very first Mayfire till this current moment, how many wildfires have occurred?
I think it's 38, could be 39, 37 to 39 is my guess.
Okay, so just in 1-2 minutes, how has the wildfire community changed from that first moment till now? You got 1 to 2 minutes. Go.
That's huge. Well, the first one was just really, it was not organized. The second Wildfire, I think, was the first time any spinning arts event had done organized classes. It might have been the third one. And then, I was working with fire drums. Anyway, the culture, sorry. Well, I think back then, we all just taught we brought whatever we had, we gave whatever we could. And it was just a real philosophy of we're just here to share these arts. We think these arts can change people's lives. And they did. They've absolutely changed hundreds and hundreds of people's lives, including mine. And then somewhere along the way, I think the art grew and matured, and it needed to. And there was more of a culture of, I would say, less in just what can I give, and a little more of, well, what are they doing for me? And I'm absolutely want to say there's nothing wrong with that. That's a different approach. It's a different culture. I think a lot of spinning arts events in the country went much more towards a model that was geared around, like, let's bring in the best teachers, let's make this very class, and how can we possibly be the best of the best, and yada yada oriented, with some focus on community. And Wildfire tried to always stay in the first and foremost, we're about accepting everyone who shows up. You showed up, you're interested in spinning, we love that you're here. We're so excited you're here. We're going to teach you everything we know. We're going to do this together as a group. And after I retired about 7 years ago, I'd say, a lot of the original founders like Scott Billups and some of the other like people who really kind of embodied that old culture, they were just like that. They had already moved on to other things. And I also moved on to other things. And some of the new leaders, that isn't as much maybe the way they feel, or they're just not as communicative about it. And other people that's not their values about the spinning arts, I think have become a much louder voice in the community.
So I have a question then. So how is Wildfire? Wildfire is 100% volunteer staffed. Maybe not.
Not anymore.
Okay. It is. So let's start from the beginning. So what exactly is a Spinning Arts Foundation in a minute or two? And what was the need to start that? Let's start there. And maybe who was at the start of that? Spinning Arts Foundation being a nonprofit that now supports Wildfire. Go on.
So it was always the case where Wildfire was under my name for the first 6 or so years, and that was never my intention. To every time I ran 16 Wildfires. I paid for my ticket. I never got a discount. I taught tons of classes. I cooked tons of meals, all that kind of stuff. It was always meant to be more of a open, transparent, community-based event. And when I incorporated and put it under that whole kind of thing, which I meant to do earlier, and other people had been in charge of doing that and never quite got it done, and I took it back over to get it done and just crank through it. If anybody out there needs a guide on how to form a nonprofit, I have a cheat sheet now that took me 6 months to put together, so you're welcome to it. But the goal was transparency. I mean, as a nonprofit, costs you more to do. There's more paperwork. It's much more of a pain in the butt. But you do, even after I left, which that was always the plan, the new people would have to post the financials. They'd have to put their meeting notes up. There would always be elections. Like, I'm the one who put the election thing in the bylaws, and that people had to age out. Like, you can only be in there for 4 years, 2 terms, I think, something like that. And that was always the goal, is like, let's get new people always involved in this. Let's keep it fresh.
Wait, so when did so you were always involved with the Spinning Arts Foundation until this year. Is that true? Or 2018?
Yep.
So the Spinning Arts Foundation only has conducted as a nonprofit mainly just Wildfire, or is there any other projects that have gone on under the Spinning Arts Foundation umbrella?
No, we did really good planning meetings and strategy meetings, that we had all these ideas of stuff we wanted to do and things like that. And frankly, what we ran into is and there have been some phenomenal people in the Wildfire organization structure. We struggled with finding leadership, and especially in the communications area, to take over after I left, and one of the other key people kind of left. And a lot of what the Spinning Arts Foundation, the board, ended up doing with a lot of our meetings was trying to help out Wildfire through that whole transition, and trying to get it kind of on its feet without us, so that we could go do other things. And there were some mistakes made there. There are things in retrospect I certainly would be like, oh man, that and that and that, we should have split that apart and done this different and stuff.
So has the nonprofit posted it? It's posted its financials since its inception, or are those are all public record online?
It is supposed to have. I know I did as the chair. I think the last 2 years we never got them from the executive director. They never got wrapped up. And some clarification. The board only has three responsibilities. They set the mission of the events they run, like Wildfire. They're in charge of defining the mission. They're in charge of hiring someone to run that. They don't run it. They're not involved in the day, despite many myths that seem to be out there. If you're on the board, you have no direct say in the day-to-day activities until it rises to the level of, is it aligning with the mission? Like, is it something so big and changing? Is it now changing the mission? And then they're in charge of the financials, making sure, they're making sure the financials are accurate, that there's a second set of eyes besides the people running the event. No one's cooking the books. Everything is legit. And that's all they can really do. They have to evaluate the people they hire. They can unfortunately fire them if they're not doing their job. But ultimately, they're trying to, help them get their job done. But that's the only thing the board has responsibility for. So
I have a question then, I guess, is kind of digging a little deeper into this Wildfire Spinning Arts Foundation. How has it been? Why is it? Okay, this is maybe an outside opinion here, but why has it been so hard to retain? Has it been hard to retain organizers in the Wildfire organization? And number two, has it been hard to retain people? I guess you kind of answer that in the Spinning Arts Foundation. But, I'm just curious, is that a challenge at your events, retaining organizers? And is that a challenge within the Spinning Arts Foundation? And maybe answering why.
Well, so at the height of Wildfire, we were running 4 events a year, which is a heck of a lot of organizers. I think we made a mistake in running that many events, and I think we burned out some people. That's just too many events to have an executive director and the top level people trying to manage simultaneously within a year. They're running 4 events. It was a lot. To answer your question directly, in some areas, we've had people running things for 6-7 years now and continue to run them and love it. In some areas, we've had people where, we've had people that didn't get the job done, that we were there supporting, helping, that just turned out they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the abilities, they had the effort or enthusiasm. And much, much credit and thanks should always be given to anyone who steps up and tries. But there have been people that definitely, I would say, they tried and they did, and it wasn't a good fit. As time has passed, especially in the last few years, where a lot of the leadership, a lot of the talking about the mission of Wildfire, motivation comes from a shared vision. And that's how people are motivated to do things. If it's by money, if it's by fear, those are terrible motivators. It's about vision. And frankly, I think the Wildfire vision has not been talked about for 5 or 6 years. It's just not, and that to me is a key thing in leadership versus management and organization. And I feel like Wildfire has struggled with finding that leadership and that communicating the vision. And as that has degraded as the brand, if you want to call it a brand, use a marketing term, has kind of lessened over time. Yeah, I think it's been harder to recruit people.
Yeah, I can see that. So, yeah, that makes sense. Because as you need to have somebody to point in a direction, right? I kind of get that. And so I guess let's ask some leadership questions. So, would you consider yourself a leader?
I would.
You would?
Well, a leader a leader that's made plenty of my own mistakes, and I don't want to take away from that, but absolutely, I think the facts and the things that have just happened can say that yes, that would be a true statement. As weird as it is to make that statement, but yes.
So what are some, not necessarily talking about yourself, but maybe people you idolize? What are some good qualities in a leader? I'm just in your mind.
I think this is a fascinating question. It's something I studied actually during my MBA program. A leader, if you just kind of break it down to, are they an effective leader? An effective leader can create a vision of something and communicate that well. And really, they can get it across, and people will see that vision and they will get on board or they won't. And that's fine. But it's how effective are you at creating that vision? and connecting with people through that. So there's a lot of argument over, like, are some of the really negative people in history great leaders? And academically, people say, yeah, they were phenomenal leaders. They got giant groups of people to follow them, and the good people too. Let's not just focus on the negative. Were they ethical? Were they, some of these other, traits that we need? No, they were terrible. They were horrible people.
So wait, does that make you? Are you might not? Are you still just a leader, even if you made? I'm just curious, unethical choices, or does most leaders end up having to make unethical choices? Ooh, double whammy there.
No, I don't think most leaders have to make unethical choices. I think being a leader is extremely hard. You do have to choose sometimes between. You have to accept the fact you're not going to make everybody happy all the time, and that's a manager or a leader. Either of those categories. But I think it's important to separate. Like, let's use, for example, culture. Very strong cultures exist in business and in philanthropic activities, stuff like that. And I think Wildfire, for its first 8 years, had an extremely strong culture, and that people that went could say these 3 traits are what Wildfire is all about, and they would just they could ramble them off pretty easily, and it was very succinct in how it was. Now, as time has gone on, and we've not talked about the culture, we've not talked about what's our mission, we've not said what does that mean publicly often. That the coherent nature of the culture has degraded. And now it's kind of a lot of different things. And people are kind of confused, like, well, is it this or is it this? And I mean, I was a big proponent for a long time of saying, like, I think there should be an East Coast fire drums. I even tried to support it with a couple of different groups that came about. And in that, fire drums is really geared towards people who are trying to be the best of the best and want that kind of level of exposure to these top people. There is a serious need for that on the East Coast. And now we have some events that are filling that gap. But I also always felt that there could be Wildfire type events all over the country, where it was more about bringing in people that just want to spin. They just want to see what in the world all this stuff's about. They want to meet people in their local area that share this desire to learn to spin a stick around their body or a weight on a string, and get excited by it when they learn that first move or something.
So what are, like, the biggest drawbacks of leadership then, or the biggest so I'm kind of like trying to get into, like, leader mindset, which would be like sort of, if you're a leader, what are some negative things that you experience by being a leader, whether with the people around you or to financially or whatever? Like, what are the negative, like, drawbacks of being a leader?
Well, I mean, there's quite a few, actually. There's the whole, I'll go there first. The stronger your culture is, the more even if your culture is about inclusivity, let's include everyone, you're going to have people who don't want that. You're going to have people like, no, we don't want to include everyone. We want to be this and this alone. And that's okay for them to believe that way. But as a leader, if your job is if your vision, and it's about a lot of your vision, you got to take input from the people that you're leading and make sure everything's coherent and, like, everybody wants what you're talking about. But as you put yourself out there more and more as being the person that is saying, hey, let's rally around this vision, you're going to have people that don't want that vision to be what the event is or something like that. And that's tough. It's tough to deal with. It's tough to be like, hey, we value your opinion. We really want to hear your input. But there's a certain point where, we've heard your input. We've listened very well. Let me, repeat it to you. This is what you're saying. Okay, we got it. We're not going in that direction. And I'm sorry. And you can catch a lot of flack for that. You certainly that can be very difficult. I have literally hundreds of emails and handwritten notes and things that of very heartfelt, like, thank yous and very meaningful, like, this thing changed my life, talking about Wildfire and stuff like that. It means so much to me, those notes. But it takes just a few of these people that are incredibly, like, negative and will go after you personally and not, and stuff that that hurts. It's really, really hard to put yourself out there like that over and over. And frankly, Noel, it burned me out. There was a certain point, like about 6 or 7 years ago, it's like, I can't do this anymore. This is taking such a toll on me, personally, emotionally, mentally.
Let's transition a little bit, because I have just kind of relating to it. So just to kind of get into this a little bit, I guess tying it all back together about being a leader, you were a leader for Wildfire Spinning Arts Foundation. And so, like, without going into specifics, I don't want to go too into it, but like there was a hubbub on the internet about you and the Spinning Arts Foundation board. What exactly happened in this exchange? I don't even need to know like feelings quite yet, but like what exactly happened from like that made you decide to leave the board? Like, was you leaving the board? So set the stage a little bit. Like basically, Chad Bennett left the Spinning Arts Foundation board, and now there's an election. So like, I don't understand. Like, what happened? Like, was it more like?
That was a combination of a lot of things. I've been trying to leave the Spinning Arts Foundation for 5 years, I would say. Like, and just go into the next thing. I ran 16 events. I was on the board. I was one of the organizers. You know, all the stuff for another 20 events, or 15 more events. That's a lot of events, and I love it. I really do love it. But like I said, it burned me out a bit. So I had been taking a step back, and frankly, since I've taken a step back, almost every event, either somewhere before the event, it felt like I was being called in or pulled in to do some firefighting, to do some like, oh, there's no marketing material. Our ticket sales are half. We don't have any teachers coming in. We don't have, we're way down in this. And it was incredibly stressful. Like all of a sudden I'd have to take a weekend or multiple nights of a week and dedicate this time to that stuff when I loved it and I wanted to do it. And not only was that, there's also, and then there's the people that were running the event that, while so many of them were doing a phenomenal job, and even the people that were not doing as good a job as they could have, some areas are doing good jobs, these were also friends. These were people I cared about, mostly. I'd say 99% of them. And having to go in and have tough conversations with people who mean incredibly well and are trying to do the things that they're doing, and just by facts are not getting things done, those conversations suck. And I did not like having them. And there was, there's resentment on both sides. I'll own my part of that. I really didn't like getting pulled into those things, and I'm sure that came across, which was bad. And they didn't want me there. No one wants to see that they're not getting their job done, and it's really tough for people. And we always try to support them. We're always there.
Right. So wait, how did this end with you leaving the board? This is I'm curious. So you're already
right. Thanks for keeping me on track. Yeah. There's so much to cover. Well, there's been a very loud group, small but loud group over the years, probably for 10 or more years, that have always wanted Wildfire to be something different than what it was. And while we were trying to always include them, it could be very personal. They would attack people. It got very negative sometimes. Wildfire's not doing well. Wildfire's not had leadership out there doing the leading thing for a while. And to some degree, I felt like there was a little bit of smelling of blood in the water. And they kind of came out and unloaded in a very kind of coordinated attack. And well, before, it always was talking about, Wildfire and maybe its philosophy and how they wanted to change. This time they made it very personal. Mm-hmm. And they came after me personally. Right. And frankly, Noel, I've been trying to step back for years.
So I just have, here's an interesting question, like not to get into specifics, right? But so what, like portions, like, cause if they're making it personal and like, as people I've seen like they're attacking your character, saying that, you have a certain type of attitude or let's just say personality, like which parts of the negatives of that of those personalities can you own and which parts are like, not like just which parts can you own, and if you feel like talking, which parts like might be incorrect, right? Like I definitely
Oh,
know. Like I'm just
sure.
curious, like because I feel like there's any real anything. It's more just like when somebody says I'm a certain way,
Mhm.
I try to think about how I could be that way because sometimes it sort of just makes it like, okay, there is definitely tinges of that because somebody saw it. So I'm just curious, like, what parts of your
Of course.
personality that people seem to have a problem with might actually be not valid, but like, what parts of
Oh
you
no,
are those?
there's very valid sides of this. There's things that I struggle with, and I've struggled with my entire career, professional career, and life that have certainly surfaced in some of these interactions. Um, I struggle. One of the things that I definitely struggle with is having tough conversations with people in like management positions. Um, I am the kind of person that I work 7 days a week. I work 10, 12 hours a day, and it's not healthy. It's not a good thing. I do tend to ask for help when I'm struggling in a certain area and things like that. And I'm incredibly self-critical. I'm very, very hard on myself. And unfortunately, that comes out when I'm talking to other people sometimes. It's hurt me very much in some personal relationships, like emotional relationships. And it's certainly come out in management situations where, having a conversation with like an executive director who we've tried to help multiple times in the, communication standpoint. We wrote a matrix for this person, and like 25% of their job was brand awareness, for example. And we went to him like, you've not done anything in this area. This is the second event. Like, you just looked on your page, and for like 2.5 weeks, you have no post about Wildfire. And Wildfire's 2 weeks from now. Like, what's up? We're here to help. What's going on? And they're like, well, look, you told me my job was about brand awareness, but you didn't say I'd have to do any marketing. And I look at them, and I struggle. I really struggle. And it's funny because I react badly. I not always, and not a lot of times. A lot of people actually say I have incredible patience. Shocking to some people to hear people actually do say that about me. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes if I got 20 other things going on, which unfortunately I do, I've not had enough sleep, I'm very stressed out, I'll react badly. And it'll just be like, hey, if you don't know that marketing is a key part of brand awareness, why did you take this position?
Right.
Like, that was so fundamental.
So I guess
and that's reaction.
So I guess like one way to say it that I often say is like often it's hard to not let your mood affect your manners. Which I feel like is sort of what you're talking about. Like basically, every once in a while a tendency when sometimes whether it's the bodily conditions or bodily context for a moment or the mental context for the moment, it might be hard to sort of like stay calm all the time or to express yourself in a way that you would ideally like to express yourself or something like that. Am I looking in this right direction?
No, that's part of it. I'd go one deeper and say that my inner monologue is incredibly, it's very harsh. I suffer from major depression, like, the big one. And one of the key things there is feeling not good enough. I was told that a lot when I was young. It stuck with me. That's what my inner monologue says all the time. And the plus side of that has been that I've achieved a lot of stuff in my life. I mean, a lot of stuff. Like, I'm really very fortunate to have done that. But the motivation was this really negative voice saying, well, if you do this, maybe you'll be good enough. If you do this, maybe you'll be good enough. And when I hear somebody come back to me with sometimes what seems like, to me, and that's not fair because my experience level and my background, like something that's incredibly obvious, like something that's just like, why are you asking me this question? I've got 12 super important things that are like burning fire, and you're coming to me with a question that if you had just Googled it, or you had just done a simple thing, because if I had done that, I would have torn myself to pieces. I would have been like just so negative to myself. And stopping in that moment and making sure that inner critic shut up and it's like, you know what? Let's take a moment and figure out the answer to this. Let's figure out how you can solve this in the future versus, come on, just Google that.
Yeah, no, I think
that's tough.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like I always say jugglers do this, but like applying your practice ethic onto flow artists, like jugglers practice that. Like a juggler has a practice ethic, and that is something that if you're looking at it from a pure practice perspective,
Right.
tends to be like more focused, important
Right.
use of their time than your average flow artist. And so, when they come at flow artists, it comes off like that, where it's like, you could be practicing more. I can't believe you're not. And you're saying you're practicing things. You're saying you're trying to get better. And it
Yeah.
seems a little bit like that, like taking your own expectations and sometimes applying them
Right.
to projecting them onto other people, and then inadvertently kind of doing like what was done to you without meaning to do it to other people. Like, and so like that's
Yeah.
something, yeah. And I think everybody has something like that, right? Like everybody's got faults. Like it's not, you
Sure.
know,
Sure.
and I fully get that. So yeah, I really appreciate that for being so.
You
So,
did ask another part of the question
okay, go
that I
ahead.
do want to elaborate on, though, and I think it's something that's been concerning me a lot in what I've been watching, not only of me but online in general. There's a new I've not thought about it or talked a lot about it to people, but there's a new culture of, it's almost like, you know what, if I'm in a conversation and I'm hurt or offended by how the conversation went, then that person is a bad person and they're wrong in whatever was said. And I know, will be the first one to say that there's things that I could have said better. In a lot of conversations, especially the difficult conversations. And you ask about, how much is my ownership versus someone else's ownership. And I always own ownership of my actions, and I know they could be better. They haunt me a lot. But some of the things that I see and I watch out there are people saying how, like no matter what they did bringing up to that conversation, like whatever their actions were that brought about a difficult conversation, that doesn't matter if they walk away from that conversation as though someone talked down to them or somebody corrected them or somebody was negative towards them. And I'm very concerned about that. I'm concerned that we can't have, I think people are more and more afraid to talk to someone about what some of their negative activities, or as a manager, how do I approach someone who's not getting a job done after repeatedly saying, how can I help? Here's some numbers we need to hit. Here's a project plan with dates. And I mean, I've struggled. I've lost friendships, people that I cared about a lot and that I respected, because we go into these conversations and they walk out and be like, you're an asshole. I'm like, I don't know how else. And I get very frustrated because I feel like I could have done better. God, I could have done better. And that frustration comes out. But it's like, but wait a second. That person has some ownership here. That person wasn't getting a job done. That person did some very negative things to the community, started attacking people on a personal level. And because I was the one that stepped up and said, hey, that's not cool. Let's keep it to issues. Let's not talk about the person individually. And then they start name calling to me, and all of a sudden I'm the asshole. And I see it more and more, and I'm concerned. We've so much gotten away from talking about issues, about how we as a group and as a culture can be better and can improve each other, and more about how it's about what I need and what my wants are, and why this festival isn't paying me enough, or these other things, and they're angry. And
well, I feel like a lot of it, for me, at least where I'm coming from, it's like sometimes it feels like the dog pile syndrome kind of thing, and that's the part that I personally have more challenges with. I have enjoyed jumping onto a dog pile, and when I say dog pile, I mean say someone doesn't like somebody, not enjoyed, but I've been present in that and sort of seen that and felt like maybe that was worth it. But it's also different, who is a community excommunicating somebody or being kind of direct about it used to be a little bit different, and maybe it was harder in the old days. I don't know. It's tough to say, but with the internet, it seems like fairly easy that you could have a problem with somebody and try to get all your friends around to have a problem with them too. And I'm not saying that when people do that, that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's easier to do that on the internet now. To sort of and I think the hard part as digital citizens of this current age is our ability to filter between causes for, like you're saying, missions that we really want to support emissions that might be trying to sell us something different or might mean something different. And I think that that's where, having this interview with you is really valuable to me, because I think that, like, I feel like every side should have some level of expressing themselves. I feel like there's so much judgment about, like, I have this podcast right now, and people act like they listen to it or they care, right? Like, it blows my mind, like, before they even seen anything. So I feel like, at the very least in our community, there at least needs to be more of, I'm not saying this, but more like real face, right? Because a lot of this community and how we interact it's so weird to think about the times when you'd see somebody once at an event and you wouldn't see them for a whole nother year until the next year, right? Like, but now it's like you see someone at an event, you could see them throughout the year until you see them again, which basically by pictures and things like that, you're interpreting who the hell this person is when you really don't know very much about them. Or in some cases, some people would say your online profile says most of what you are. So, like, it's kind of trippy in that way, but, like, that's what the dog pile, kind of rounding it back around, is like how people gather around supporting or not being in support of a mission, and that's now become like a person or a organization or things like that. And I find that, like, there's a lot of, like, very tricky, what do you want to call it? Like, not decision making, but filtering in your own mind about what types of things, like, through your social profile, like what kinds of people you like and vibe with and what kind you don't, which I find to be really, like, interesting. And just kind of going back to the, a lot of the negative feedback that you maybe have received online, and I'm guessing a lot of that probably has to do with a combination of, your involvement as a leader in leading the mission of Wildfire in the way that you thought it should have gone. Maybe every now and then with a less than positive interaction that you thought you, like, this is over, like, friggin' 8-9 years, right? So it's easy to say that, but
you're talking about 14 years.
So, but basically, a lot of negative opinions and negative interactions while leading a mission, right? Which is hard, right? And it's even, and I would say that's something you didn't mention, which I think is actually even harder in most cases. Granted, I feel rather successful with a lot of the FAI stuff recently in terms of changing general managers, but, like, I think what's really hard is when an organization not just has a leader and the leader is there, it's when it moves to, like, a different leader is sometimes when it's really challenging, where it's like, and I can see this a little bit, where it's like, you build up all these interactions over a long course of time, you decide to leave this thing, sort of, and then basically you continue to have those old interactions, whether play out saltily, if they've already played out saltily, in some kind of repeated fashion, which is, I don't know if that's true, but for me, I have, like, negative interactions that are like nicks every now and then. It's like, oh, there's another one. Oh, that's weird. But, like, but then you get to a point where, like, there's a new leader in place, and yet you're the assumed leader because you're still by default around. So that gets very challenging, I could see, for how people paint you, right? Because they don't talk to you. They don't see, like, this could be the first time that somebody sees you even speak, right? Because who's not from Boston. And actually, it's really crazy thinking about that, because even people I've met at events, I've never even heard speak until I've seen them online, which is super cool. But yeah, so I don't know. I hope that makes sense. And I just, my big question is, as we kind of get closer to the end, I have a couple more questions I want to ask you about. But one is, like, what are you doing to move forward from all this? Like, just to kind of paint the picture, you've had some negative interactions when exiting Wildfire couple times and Spinning Arts Foundation or whatever. But, like, what steps can you take? Forget about everybody else right now. What steps can you take to sort of, like, not necessarily rebuild bridges, but to build yourself into, like, a person that maybe if you could, like, take that person and stick them back into 2000 whatever, like what kind of person would you like to, like, what kind of parts of you would you change, like, moving forward? You just mentioned a lot about how you communicate with people a little bit, but, like, yeah, like, what are next steps for you in this community and yourself?
Yeah, that seemed like there was a lot of things in that question.
Yeah.
Dissect a few of them. I think there's a group of people that will never be friends of mine. As much as I would like to reach out to them, and a few of them, I think a lot of the bullying that happens out there, especially people that accuse others of bullying, are actively bullying, and it's kind of interesting to watch. I don't plan on doing anything to. By and large, if you've noticed my online presence, but mostly I don't focus on negative stuff. If you knew me personally, I don't gossip. When in gossip situations, I often will stop a conversation. Be like, look, I'd rather not talk about that. I don't want to focus on negative stuff like that. And it might have bit me in the ass, honestly, like not fighting rumors, not going out and, being that kind of person that like does that kind of stuff, but I'm not interested in it. In many ways, like leaving Wildfire, and I got a lot of, some really heartfelt personal messages as some of that stuff was going on. It didn't go on very long. It was like a couple of weeks, and it was a couple of 8 and very outspoken people, and then some dogpiling, as you call it. A lot of people reached out to me, really good, solid people that I have a lot of respect for, and were just so frustrated and disgusted by what was going on online, and just said a lot of very supportive things. And it reminded me that over the last few years, I felt very disconnected from my own personal friends and my own personal community. And one of my goals in 2019, talking about going forward, was to reconnect with some of the really good people out there that I miss. And honestly, getting that list of people reaching out to me was the best, like, oh my goodness, these are the people that I really should reach back out to and connect with, because they're mature, they're thoughtful, they're just good, wholesome people, and I like them. So that, I'm not stressed. I didn't really, that, like, you never realize what you're carrying until it's gone.
Yeah.
Like, there was a large weight on my shoulders of expecting to have to jump in and help out Wildfire, not paid, not, just, and I love it. I love Wildfire. I love what it's all about. But feeling like that was going to be, yet again, during our crunch time, Dark Monk's crunch time, middle festival season, having to take a full weekend and a few weeknights to create some ads or reach out to teachers or this, that, and the other. It's not a huge amount of work. It's just this extra level of stress during a time that often I don't have any time whatsoever. So I've actually felt more focused. I felt like, honestly, better, like, oh my goodness, I can now dedicate myself to these other things.
Well, maybe in that way, like, it's positive for everybody. Yeah, there's new leadership in Spinning Arts Foundation. You also get to alleviate yourself probably ever again of that responsibility to some extent.
Yeah.
But, so we're kind of getting to the 50-minute mark. This is longer than I thought it was going to be. Hope
I'm not taking up too much time.
It's all good. I just wanted to make sure I got through some of these questions here. I guess, I have a couple more, but I think I'm feeling pretty good. Do you have any questions for me? Since I'll just, let you come at me for a minute. I got, 4 minutes. I only have an hour on YouTube.
Questions for you? Wow, I wasn't prepared. I should have thought this through. Well, as the person that ran Fire Jumps, I feel like there would probably have so many stories to swap someday and so much stuff to share. How did you find ways, and this is just me personally asking you as something I struggle with, did you find good mechanisms and ways to help have some of the more difficult conversations? I have no doubt that you ran into times where people, you needed to have these tough conversations with. What do you want?
I think having courageous conversations often takes courage, right? I have to be honest. I don't know. For example, I've lived with a lot of people. It's like a funny one way. And living with a lot of people, I've had maybe 2 or 3 roommates and it go not end well. We're talking I've had 50, right?
Sure.
In the few places at the Vulcan and I think that you only get better by practicing it, and it doesn't mean that every person you're going to resolve or have a feeling of resolve an issue. And just because you weren't resolved doesn't mean you still can't be friends. Or sometimes it means if it's not resolved, that person constantly holds resentment, right? There's a lot of endings of that. But I just think that for me, I've always really tried to have, at least for the most part, some of the difficult conversations, leaving myself available to be open, to talking with people about them in most cases. And I'm not going to say all of them, but in most cases. So I don't know. I think, you just really, it's like stats, you know, like your average gets better the more you do them, right? Like if you don't really practice having courageous conversations and like really hard ones where you put yourself in a bit of uncomfortableness, you're not really going to develop in being able to conduct those, right? Like the hardest ones that most of us will face in our life is the ones with our parents, right? Where you like ask your parents, like, hey, why'd you say this? Or like this one time I felt this way and it was messed up, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, you really, that's like one of those big ones. Or sometimes people have those with their siblings and things like that. And I kind of think that, yeah, you just get better by really confronting sort of like the biggest conversations that you haven't had in your life. And it doesn't necessarily mean like apologizing to a person in the past or anything like that. I mean, a lot of people romanticize it as if it's like, you know, you could wait 20 years and finally solve that problem. It's not exactly how that goes. It's like a daily practice, you know? Like I work with kids, and working with kids is a lot of conversations. They even like dislike when I say, hey, let's have a conversation. They're like, oh man, not another conversation, you know? But like, I mean, serious, like they don't like it. But I think that like the conversation and the discourse that comes with having conversations about things you may not necessarily agree with is like invaluable. It's not even the solution, it's the discourse itself. Like the ability to have that conversation is the goal. It's not the result of that discourse. I know a lot of people are like results oriented, but I think a lot of this, like especially like emotional stuff where people feel different, it's the ability to like have high emotion and still be able to communicate to one another. So yeah, practicing that skill. That's what I got.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Chad, show us the cat before I go.
Ah, there he goes.
Oh man, what cat was that?
Oh, he's a very skittish cat. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I appreciate you taking time out your day to be on the Sticks Out podcast. And, you know, we didn't talk too much about your company, Dark Monk. But, you know, if you're interested, you can go to darkmonk.com.
Dark-monk.com.
Dark-monk.com.
I know. We couldn't get the domain Dark Monk. It was already taken.
And I hope that business goes well. And in your sort of, like, flow retirement that you know, I don't know. Not flow retirement, but, like, you know, festival running flow. Festival involvement, organization, retirement, that things go well for you. And, yeah. That's all I got to say. Thanks, Chad.
Hey, thanks a ton, Noel. Hope you're doing well, and good luck with all the podcasts and all the other stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Bye.
Right. Bye, buddy.
Don't hang up. I got to turn this off. Hold on.
All right.